Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Camp Pendleton, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her chin held high despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete parade ground where dozens of new recruits were gathering for their first day of advanced combat training. At 23, Sarah had already proven herself through basic training and specialized communications coursework. But this was different. This was the Marines' most elite tactical training program, and she was one of only 3 women selected from hundreds of applicants. The Marine Corps had only recently opened combat roles to women, and the change wasn't welcomed by everyone. Sarah had heard the whispers during her previous assignments, seen the eye rolls when she entered a room full of male soldiers, felt the weight of constantly having to prove she belonged. But she had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let doubt creep in now. Her father, a Vietnam veteran who had died when she was 16, had always told her that respect was earned, not given, and she intended to earn every ounce of it. As Sarah approached the formation area, she could hear the low murmur of conversations among the male recruits. Most were sizing each other up, as soldiers do, but she noticed how the talking died down when she passed certain groups. Some stared openly, others whispered among themselves. She had learned to develop thick skin during her military career, but the isolation still stung sometimes, especially when she was already nervous about proving herself in a new environment. "Look what the Navy sent us," she heard someone mutter from behind her, followed by quiet laughter. The comment was meant to be overheard, a common tactic she had encountered before. Marines often looked down on other branches of the military, but Sarah had transferred from the Army, not the Navy. The mistake told her these soldiers hadn't even bothered to read her file properly before deciding to dismiss her. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared seemingly from nowhere, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Formation. Everyone on the line now." The scattered groups of recruits quickly assembled into neat rows, their conversations ending abruptly. Sarah took her place in the formation, standing at attention with her eyes fixed straight ahead. She could feel the glances of the men around her, some curious, others clearly skeptical about her presence. Rodriguez began walking up and down the line, his boots clicking rhythmically on the concrete. He was a compact man with steel-gray eyes and scars on his hands that spoke of real combat experience. "You think you're hot stuff because you made it this far," he announced to the group. "You think your previous training means something here. Let me tell you what it means: absolutely nothing. This is where we separate the real Marines from the pretenders." The staff sergeant stopped directly in front of Sarah, his gaze boring into her. "Some of you might be here because of politics," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. "Some of you might be here to prove a point. But I don't care about politics, and I don't care about your points. I care about one thing: whether you can do the job when bullets start flying and your brothers need you to perform." Sarah kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral, but inside she was burning. She knew the comment was directed at her, knew that in his mind she was there because the military was trying to be progressive rather than because she had earned her spot. It was a familiar accusation, one that had followed her throughout her career. The assumption that her gender automatically made her less qualified, that any success she achieved was handed to her rather than earned. After Rodriguez moved on, she could hear whispered comments from the recruits around her. "Bet she won't last a week," someone said quietly. $20 says she's crying by Friday," came another voice. "I heard they have to lower the standards when women are in the class," added a third. Each comment was like a small cut, not deep enough to cause real damage, but sharp enough to remind her that she was fighting an uphill battle. The first day consisted mainly of administrative tasks, equipment distribution, and briefings about the training program ahead. Sarah learned that they would be spending the next 12 weeks in intensive combat training, covering everything from advanced marksmanship to urban warfare tactics. The program had a 50% dropout rate even among the male recruits, and the instructors made it clear that they expected several people to quit before the end of the first week. During lunch, Sarah sat alone at a table in the mess hall, reading through the training manual while she ate. She had learned early in her military career that mealtimes were often when the casual hazing was worst, when soldiers felt free to make jokes and comments without the watchful eyes of superior officers. Keeping busy with work was her way of avoiding unnecessary confrontation while still maintaining her dignity. "Hey, Martinez," called out Corporal Johnson, a tall redhead from Texas who had been one of the most vocal critics during formation. "You sure you're in the right place? The kitchen staff is through that door." His table erupted in laughter, and Sarah looked up from her manual to see him pointing toward the rear of the mess hall. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied calmly, returning her attention to her reading. She had learned that engaging with these comments usually only encouraged more of them, but completely ignoring harassment could be seen as weakness. A simple, confident response was often the best approach. "Come on, we're just having some fun," Johnson continued, clearly not satisfied with her reaction. "No need to be so serious all the time. Maybe if you smiled more, people would be friendlier." More laughter from his table, and Sarah noticed that other conversations in the mess hall had quieted down as people tuned in to see how this interaction would play out. Before Sarah could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Johnson, why don't you worry about your own training instead of bothering other recruits?" The speaker was Lance Corporal Davis, a quiet African-American soldier from Detroit who had barely spoken during the morning sessions. He was sitting 2 tables away, but his voice carried clearly across the space. "Some of us are trying to eat in peace." Johnson's face flushed red, but he seemed unsure how to respond to the unexpected challenge. Davis wasn't confronting him directly, but he was clearly calling out the behavior without making it a personal attack. It was a skillful intervention that defused the immediate tension while making it clear that not everyone supported the harassment. "Whatever, Davis," Johnson muttered, turning back to his own meal. "Just saying people should know their place, that's all." Sarah caught Davis's eye and nodded slightly in acknowledgement of his support. It was a small gesture, but it meant something to know that at least one person in the group was willing to speak up. She had learned not to expect or rely on support from others, but when it came, she appreciated it. The afternoon brought their first physical training session, and Sarah knew this was where her real test would begin. Physical fitness was where many of her critics expected her to fail, where they believed the fundamental differences between men and women would become obvious. She had always been strong for her size, but she was realistic about the challenges she faced. Most of the male recruits had significant advantages in upper body strength and overall size. The PT session began with a 5-mile run in full gear, and Sarah was relieved to find that her endurance training had paid off. She finished in the middle of the pack, ahead of several male recruits who were struggling with the pace. Running had always been one of her strengths, and she could see the surprise on some faces as she crossed the finish line without appearing overly winded. "Not bad for a girl," someone called out as she walked past during the cool-down period. The comment was meant to sound like a compliment, but Sarah recognized the backhanded nature of it. Everything she did would be qualified by her gender, measured against lowered expectations rather than judged on its own merit. The obstacle course was next, and this was where Sarah knew she would face her biggest challenges. The course included rope climbs, wall scaling, and heavy equipment carries that would test her upper body strength. As she watched the first few recruits tackle the obstacles, she mentally rehearsed her approach to each challenge, looking for techniques that would allow her to compensate for her size disadvantage. When her turn came, Sarah attacked the first obstacle with determination. It was a series of low crawls under barbed wire, and her smaller frame actually worked to her advantage here. She moved quickly through the section, her technique smooth and efficient. Behind her, she could hear Johnson struggling with the confined space, his larger frame making the crawl more difficult. The rope climb was next, and Sarah had spent months preparing for this exact challenge. She had developed a technique that relied more on leg strength and body positioning than pure upper body power, and she made steady progress up the 30-foot rope. It wasn't the fastest ascent of the day, but it was solid and controlled, and she reached the top without having to stop and rest. As she rappelled down, she could hear mixed reactions from the group watching below. Some seemed genuinely impressed by her performance, while others were clearly disappointed that she hadn't failed as spectacularly as they had hoped. The wall climb proved more challenging, requiring her to find creative solutions for gripping holds that were positioned for taller climbers, but she managed to complete it successfully. The equipment carry was her biggest struggle. Each recruit had to transport a 90-pound pack of gear across a 100-meter course that included various obstacles. Sarah's approach was methodical and efficient, but she was clearly working harder than most of the male recruits to move the same amount of weight. By the time she finished, she was exhausted and had posted one of the slower times of the day. That was painful to watch, she heard someone comment as she set down the pack at the finish line. How is she supposed to carry a wounded soldier if she can barely handle the training equipment? The comment hit harder than Sarah wanted to admit because it touched on one of her own fears. She knew that in combat situations, she might need to move injured teammates who weighed significantly more than the training gear. It was a legitimate concern, one that went beyond the petty harassment and got to the heart of whether she could perform the job effectively. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the group after everyone had completed the course. "Some of you look good out there," he announced. "Some of you look like you need to find a new career field. Everyone will have their times posted tomorrow morning, along with the minimum standards you need to meet to stay in this program. If you're not meeting standards by the end of week 2, you'll be transferred to a different assignment." As the group dispersed to clean equipment and prepare for evening chow, Sarah found herself walking alone back toward the barracks. She was tired, sore, and feeling the weight of the day's challenges, both physical and emotional. The constant scrutiny was exhausting, and she wondered how long she could maintain the mental energy required to prove herself over and over again. "Martinez!" Davis's voice called out behind her. She turned to see him jogging to catch up, his own equipment bag slung over his shoulder. "Good job on the obstacle course today. That rope climb technique was solid." "Thanks," she replied, genuinely grateful for the positive feedback. "I've been working on it for months. Still need to get faster on the equipment carry, though." "We all have things to work on," Davis said. Johnson struggled with half the obstacles, but nobody's questioning whether he belongs here. "Don't let the comments get to you. Most of these guys have never worked with women in combat roles before. They don't know what to expect." Sarah nodded, appreciating both the support and the honest assessment. Davis was right that much of the resistance she faced came from unfamiliarity rather than malice, but that didn't make it easier to deal with. She had to prove herself in a way that her male colleagues never would, and the pressure was constant. As they walked, Davis shared some of his own experiences with discrimination in the military. As an African-American soldier from an inner-city background, he had faced his own set of challenges and assumptions throughout his career. While their situations weren't identical, there was common ground in understanding what it felt like to be judged by characteristics beyond their control. "The thing is," Davis said as they approached the barracks, "performance speaks louder than prejudice. Keep doing your job well, and eventually most people come around. The ones who don't come around aren't worth worrying about anyway." That evening, as Sarah lay in her bunk reviewing the day's events, she thought about Davis's words. She had always believed that performance would ultimately win out, but some days the path to proving herself seemed longer and more difficult than she had anticipated. The physical challenges were demanding, but manageable. The social challenges were proving to be just as exhausting. Looking around the barracks, she could see other recruits sharing stories, playing cards, and building the kinds of informal bonds that would be crucial during the difficult weeks ahead. She was largely excluded from these interactions, not necessarily out of malice, but because her presence changed the dynamic of the group. Soldiers were more guarded around her, less likely to share personal stories or engage in the crude humor that was common in military settings. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part of her situation. Sarah had always been social and enjoyed the camaraderie that was one of the best aspects of military life. Being constantly on the outside, constantly having to prove her worth, was emotionally draining in ways she hadn't fully anticipated when she applied for the program. As lights out approached, Sarah made a mental commitment to herself. She would not let the doubters determine her success or failure. She would not quit because some people made her feel unwelcome. She had worked too hard and come too far to let other people's limitations define her own possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she would meet them with the same determination that had brought her this far. The last thing she heard before falling asleep was Johnson's voice from across the barracks, talking quietly to his bunkmate about how the program was being dumbed down to accommodate her presence. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to focus on her own goals rather than his ignorance. She had a job to do, and she intended to do it well, regardless of what anyone else thought or said. The second week of training brought new challenges and harder tests. Sarah found herself settling into a routine of early morning physical training, classroom instruction on tactics and weapon systems, and afternoon field exercises. Her performance was steadily improving, but the social dynamics remained difficult. The comments hadn't stopped, though they had become more subtle and harder to address directly. During a weapons maintenance session, Sarah was working on disassembling her rifle when Private Henderson, a stocky recruit from Alabama, made a show of offering to help her. "Need a hand with that, sweetheart?" he asked loudly enough for others to hear. "Those springs can be pretty tough for small hands to handle." Sarah looked up from her work, her rifle already completely disassembled and laid out in perfect order on her cleaning mat. "I think I've got it covered," she replied calmly, beginning the reassembly process with practiced efficiency. She had grown up around firearms and had been maintaining military weapons for years. Her hands moved quickly and confidently, completing the task faster than Henderson had managed with his own weapon. The watching recruits fell silent as Sarah finished the reassembly, conducted a function check, and returned her rifle to ready condition. Henderson's face reddened, and he turned back to his own equipment without saying another word. It was a small victory, but Sarah had learned to appreciate these moments when her competence spoke for itself. Later that day, during urban warfare training, the recruits were divided into squads for house-clearing exercises. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Johnson, Henderson, and 2 other recruits who had been among her harshest critics. She suspected the assignment wasn't accidental. The instructors were likely testing how well she could work with soldiers who clearly didn't want her there. The exercise involved clearing a mock building of simulated enemy forces using live ammunition training rounds. Each squad member had a specific role, and coordination was essential for success. Sarah was assigned as the team's communications specialist, responsible for maintaining contact with headquarters and coordinating with other squads operating in the area. As they approached the target building, Johnson took charge as the squad leader. "Martinez, you stay back and handle the radio stuff," he ordered. "Let the real soldiers do the dangerous work." His tone made it clear he viewed her role as secondary and less important than the direct combat positions. Sarah bit back her first response and focused on the mission. She knew that communications were actually critical to the success of the operation, even if Johnson didn't appreciate that fact. As the squad moved toward the building, she established contact with the command post and began relaying information about their approach and the tactical situation. The first floor of the building was cleared without incident, but as the squad moved toward the stairwell, Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent message. "Red Squad, this is command. We have intelligence indicating enemy reinforcements approaching your position from the east. Recommend you expedite clearing operations." Sarah immediately relayed the message to Johnson, but he waved her off dismissively. "We're fine," he said. "Don't need headquarters telling us how to do our job." He signaled for the squad to continue up the stairs at their original pace, ignoring the warning about incoming enemy forces. As they reached the second floor, the sound of simulated gunfire erupted from outside the building. The exercise controllers had activated the enemy reinforcement scenario, and Sarah could hear the training rounds impacting the walls around them. Johnson's squad was now caught in a crossfire between the enemies they were trying to clear from the building and the reinforcements approaching from outside. "Command, this is Red Squad," Sarah called into her radio. "We're taking fire from multiple directions and need immediate support." She had to shout to be heard over the noise of the simulated battle raging around them. "Roger, Red Squad," came the response. "Blue Squad is moving to support from the west side. Green Squad will provide cover fire from the south. Maintain your position and continue clearing operations." Sarah relayed the support information to Johnson, who was now looking considerably less confident than he had a few minutes earlier. The squad was pinned down in a hallway with limited cover, and the exercise was not going according to his plan. Several of the team members were looking around nervously, unsure of what to do next. "We need to coordinate with the other squads," Sarah told Johnson. "I can guide them to our position and help set up a coordinated assault on the remaining enemy positions." She could see the tactical situation clearly from her position and had been tracking the movements of all the friendly forces through her radio communications. Johnson hesitated, his pride warring with the reality of the situation. The exercise was clearly going badly, and his initial dismissal of the radio warnings had put the squad in a difficult position. "Fine," he said finally. "Do whatever you need to do." Sarah took charge of coordinating the rescue operation, using her radio to guide the supporting squads into position around the building. She directed Blue Squad to a flanking position that would allow them to catch the enemy reinforcements in a crossfire, while positioning Green Squad to provide covering fire for her own team's escape from the building. "Blue Squad, move to the loading dock on the east side," she directed. "Green Squad, establish overwatch from the water tower. Red Squad will exit through the west window on signal." Her voice was calm and professional, cutting through the chaos of the simulated battle with clear, precise instructions. The coordinated assault worked perfectly. Blue Squad caught the enemy reinforcements in a vulnerable position, while Green Squad's covering fire allowed Sarah's team to escape from the building without taking any simulated casualties. The entire exercise concluded successfully, with all objectives met and no friendly casualties recorded. During the after-action review, the instructor, Captain Williams, praised the communication and coordination that had turned a potentially failed mission into a success. The key to this operation was the rapid adaptation when the tactical situation changed, he told the assembled squads. Someone kept their head under pressure and made sure all the moving pieces worked together. Sarah felt a flush of pride at the recognition, but she could see that Johnson and some of the other critics weren't happy about the praise. In their minds, her success somehow diminished their own contributions, even though the entire team had benefited from the improved coordination. After the review session, Davis approached her with a grin. "Nice work on the radio," he said. "That was some pretty smooth coordination under pressure." Johnson looked like he was ready to panic before you took over the communications. "It's just training," Sarah replied, though she was pleased with how the exercise had gone. Everyone did their part. She had learned to downplay her successes to avoid seeming arrogant or attention-seeking, but internally, she was satisfied with her performance. "Maybe," Davis said, "but not everyone could have kept track of 3 different squads while taking simulated fire. That takes some serious multitasking skills." That evening, Sarah noticed a subtle shift in how some of the recruits interacted with her. A few who had been openly dismissive seemed more willing to engage in normal conversation. Private Wilson, who had barely spoken to her before, asked for her help with a tactical problem he was struggling with in their homework assignment. The change wasn't universal, and Johnson's core group remained hostile, but Sarah could sense that her performance during the day's exercise had earned her some measure of respect from the more reasonable members of the training group. It was progress, even if it was slower than she had hoped. The third week brought their first extended field exercise, a 3-day operation in the California mountains where the recruits would be tested on everything they had learned so far. The squads would be operating with minimal instructor supervision, forcing them to rely on each other in ways that the controlled classroom and range exercises hadn't required. Sarah's squad was assigned a reconnaissance mission that required them to move 12 miles through rough terrain, establish an observation post overlooking a simulated enemy camp, and report on enemy activities for 48 hours. The mission would test not only their tactical skills, but also their ability to work together under stress and fatigue. The first challenge came just 2 hours into the movement phase. Henderson, who was carrying the squad's heavy machine gun, began struggling with the weight of his equipment as they climbed through steep, rocky terrain. The pace slowed significantly as he stopped frequently to rest, and it became clear that they would not reach their objective on schedule if something didn't change. "I can take some of his gear," Sarah offered, though her own pack was already loaded to capacity. She could see that Henderson was pushing himself to exhaustion trying to keep up, and his pride was preventing him from asking for help. "No way," Johnson said immediately. "He can handle his own equipment. We're not going to slow down the whole squad because someone can't carry their load." Sarah could see the tension building in the group. Henderson was clearly struggling, but Johnson's attitude was making it impossible for anyone to offer assistance without seeming to challenge his leadership. The squad was in danger of falling apart before they even reached their mission area. "Look," Sarah said, addressing the group rather than Johnson directly. "We all have the same objective here. Getting to the observation post on time is more important than who carries what gear. If we redistribute the weight, everyone can move faster and more efficiently." She began pulling items from her own pack, extra ammunition, rations, and water, and distributing them among the other squad members. "Henderson, give me the tripod for the machine gun. Wilson, you take the extra ammo. Davis, can you handle the spare radio batteries?" The redistribution worked exactly as Sarah had predicted. With the weight more evenly distributed, the squad was able to maintain a much faster pace through the difficult terrain. Henderson, relieved of some of his burden, was able to keep up easily, and the entire team reached their objective ahead of schedule. Johnson didn't thank Sarah for the solution, but he didn't countermand her actions either. Sarah could tell he was torn between his desire to maintain control and his recognition that her approach had been more effective than his own. The observation post assignment proved to be even more revealing of the squad's dynamics. They needed to maintain constant surveillance of the enemy camp while remaining undetected, a task that required careful coordination and discipline. Sarah volunteered to take the first watch, using her communication skills to establish contact with headquarters and begin reporting on enemy activities. During her 4-hour shift, Sarah identified and documented the positions of enemy sentries, vehicle movements, and what appeared to be preparations for a major operation. Her reports were detailed and professional, providing the kind of intelligence that would be valuable for planning future operations against the simulated enemy force. When Henderson took over the watch, Sarah helped him set up the observation equipment and briefed him on what she had seen during her shift. She could tell he was nervous about the responsibility, and she spent extra time making sure he understood how to use the long-range optics and radio equipment effectively. "Thanks," Henderson said quietly as she prepared to get some rest. "I wasn't sure about some of this stuff." It was the first time he had spoken to her in a normal, friendly tone since the training began. "No problem," Sarah replied. "We all have things we're better at than others. You're solid with the heavy weapon stuff. I learned a lot watching you work with the machine gun yesterday." The compliment seemed to surprise Henderson, and Sarah could see him thinking about their interactions over the past few weeks. She had always tried to acknowledge other people's strengths, even when they were critical of her, but this was the first time she sensed that he was really listening to what she was saying. The second day of the exercise brought an unexpected test when the squad's radio equipment was damaged during a simulated artillery attack. Without communications, they couldn't report their observations to headquarters or coordinate with other units in the area. The mission was in danger of complete failure. Sarah examined the damaged radio and quickly identified the problem: a loose connection in the antenna assembly that had been jarred apart by the simulation effects. The repair required disassembling part of the radio housing and resoldering a broken wire, work that required both technical knowledge and steady hands under pressure. "Can you fix it?" Johnson asked, his earlier attitude replaced by genuine concern. Without communications, the squad would have to abort their mission and return to base, a failure that would reflect poorly on all of them. "I think so," Sarah replied, already pulling tools from her equipment kit. "Give me about 20 minutes. She had always been good with electronics, a skill that had served her well in her communications specialization. But this repair was more complex than anything she had attempted in a field environment. Working by flashlight inside their concealed position, Sarah carefully disassembled the radio components and located the broken connection. The repair required precision and patience, qualities that were tested by the stress of operating in enemy territory with limited time and resources. The other squad members watched nervously as she worked, understanding that the success of their mission depended on her technical skills. When Sarah finally powered up the repaired radio and successfully made contact with headquarters, the relief in the squad was visible. They had maintained their mission capability and could continue providing valuable intelligence on enemy activities. More importantly, Sarah had demonstrated a crucial skill that none of the other squad members possessed. "Nice work," Davis said, clearly impressed by the technical repair. "That was some pretty advanced electronics work to do in the field." Even Johnson seemed grudgingly appreciative, though he didn't express it directly. "Good," he said simply. "Now we can get back to the real mission." The final day of the exercise brought a complex scenario where the squad had to direct artillery fire onto the enemy positions they had been observing. This required precise coordination between Sarah's radio communications and the targeting information provided by the other squad members. A single mistake in the coordinates or timing could result in simulated friendly fire casualties or mission failure. Sarah found herself at the center of the operation, relaying target coordinates to the artillery unit while simultaneously coordinating with headquarters and other reconnaissance teams in the area. The technical and tactical complexity was demanding, requiring her to process multiple streams of information while maintaining precise communication protocols. "Fire mission, grid 123-45678. Enemy vehicle concentration. Request high explosive rounds," she transmitted, her voice steady and professional despite the pressure of the situation. The artillery response came back immediately, confirming the target coordinates and requesting additional guidance. As the simulated artillery strikes began impacting the enemy positions, Sarah coordinated the damage assessment with her squad mates while adjusting fire to cover additional targets they identified. The entire engagement required split-second timing and perfect communication, skills that had been developed through hours of training but were now being tested in a realistic combat scenario. The exercise concluded with complete success. All enemy targets were effectively engaged, no friendly forces were endangered by the artillery fire, and the squad accomplished all of their assigned objectives. During the final debrief, the exercise controllers specifically mentioned the quality of the communications and fire coordination that had made the complex operation possible. As the squads prepared to return to base camp, Sarah noticed that something had fundamentally changed in her relationships with the other recruits. The constant testing and proving herself hadn't ended, but there was a new level of respect in how people interacted with her. Henderson offered to help carry some of her equipment during the march back, and even Wilson made casual conversation about the exercise without any of the awkwardness that had characterized their earlier interactions. Johnson remained distant, but his hostility had been replaced by a grudging professional acknowledgement of her capabilities. He no longer made disparaging comments about her presence in the program, though he also didn't go out of his way to include her in group activities. The change was subtle but significant. Sarah realized that she had crossed some kind of threshold where her performance had become impossible to ignore or dismiss. She was no longer fighting just to prove she belonged. She was establishing herself as a valuable member of the team whose skills contributed to everyone's success. That night, as she cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next phase of training, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first day when the comments and skepticism had seemed so overwhelming. The challenges weren't over, and she knew that every new situation would require her to prove herself again. But she felt more confident in her ability to meet those challenges successfully. Davis approached her as she worked, carrying his own equipment for cleaning. "You know," he said, settling down beside her, "I think people are starting to figure out that you're not here to prove a point about women in combat. You're here because you're a good soldier." Sarah smiled at the comment, appreciating both the observation and the implicit acknowledgement of how far she had come. "That's all I ever wanted," she replied. "Just to be judged on my performance like everyone else." "Well," Davis said with a grin, "mission accomplished on that front. Even Johnson can't argue with results like today." As Sarah continued her equipment maintenance, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the successful completion of the exercise. She had proven to herself and others that she could perform under pressure, contribute valuable skills to the team, and earn respect through competence and professionalism. The road ahead was still long, but she was no longer walking it alone. The fourth week of training marked the beginning of advanced combat scenarios, and with it came the arrival of a new instructor who would change everything for Sarah and her fellow recruits. Colonel Patricia Hayes was a legend in the Marine Corps, a combat veteran with 3 deployments and a Silver Star for heroism in Afghanistan. She was also the first woman to command an infantry battalion in active combat operations. When Colonel Hayes walked into the briefing room that Monday morning, the entire group of recruits fell silent. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to assess each person individually as her gaze swept across the room. Her presence commanded immediate respect in a way that had nothing to do with her rank and everything to do with the quiet confidence she projected. "I'm Colonel Hayes," she announced, her voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. "For the next 4 weeks, I'll be overseeing your training in advanced tactics and leadership under pressure. Some of you have heard stories about me. Some of those stories might even be true. What I want you to understand right now is that I don't care about your personal opinions, your prejudices, or your comfortable assumptions about who belongs in combat and who doesn't." Sarah felt a flutter of hope at the colonel's words, but she tried not to let her expectations get too high. She had learned to be cautious about assuming that female officers would automatically be supportive or understanding of her situation. Military culture was complex, and sometimes women in leadership positions felt they needed to be even harder on female subordinates to avoid accusations of favoritism. "Excellence is the only standard I recognize," Colonel Hayes continued. "If you can perform the mission effectively, I don't care if you're male, female, tall, short, black, white, or purple with green stripes. If you can't perform the mission, you don't belong here, regardless of any other characteristics you might possess." The colonel's gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment, but her expression was unreadable. Sarah kept her own face neutral, determined not to show either hope or concern about what that attention might mean for her future in the program. "Today we begin urban warfare exercises that will test everything you've learned so far," Hayes announced. "You'll be working in mixed teams with recruits from other training programs. Some of your teammates will be people you've never worked with before. Some will be people you think you know well. Either way, you'll need to adapt quickly to new leadership styles and team dynamics." As the recruits filed out of the briefing room, Sarah found herself walking next to a young woman she had never seen before. The newcomer was tall and athletic, with confident posture and the kind of intense focus that Sarah associated with serious athletes or dedicated soldiers. I'm Lieutenant Torres, the woman said, extending her hand. I'm here from the Officer Candidate School for cross-training in enlisted tactics. Heard there's another woman in this program who's been making quite an impression. Sarah shook the offered hand, surprised by the firm grip and direct manner. Sarah Martinez. I'm not sure about making an impression, but I'm trying to do my job. According to my instructors, you've been doing more than just your job, Torres replied. They've been using your performance as an example in our leadership classes. Apparently, you've been showing some of the male recruits what it looks like to stay focused on the mission instead of getting distracted by politics. The comment caught Sarah off guard. She had been so focused on day-to-day survival in the program that she hadn't considered how her performance might be viewed by instructors or used in other training contexts. The idea that her struggles and successes were being discussed in officer training classes was both flattering and somewhat embarrassing. The urban warfare exercise proved to be the most complex scenario Sarah had encountered so far. The mixed teams were tasked with clearing a simulated city district that included multiple buildings, underground tunnels, and civilian areas where enemy forces might be hiding among non-combatants. The exercise required not just tactical skills, but also split-second decision-making about when to use force and when to show restraint. Sarah found herself assigned to a team led by Torres, with Johnson and 2 other recruits she didn't know well. The team composition immediately created an interesting dynamic. Torres was clearly in command, but as an officer candidate rather than an experienced enlisted soldier, she would need to rely on the tactical expertise of her team members. Martinez, Torres said as they prepared their equipment, I understand you've got solid communication skills and good tactical awareness. I want you handling coordination with the other teams while we move through the urban environment. Johnson, you're our heavy weapons specialist. Wilson and Stevens, you'll be our point men for building clearance. Sarah noticed that Torres had assigned roles based on demonstrated competence rather than assumptions about gender or size. It was refreshing to work with someone who seemed genuinely focused on mission effectiveness rather than social dynamics. The exercise began with the teams approaching the urban area from different directions, with Sarah's team assigned to clear the central district while other teams handled the surrounding areas. Almost immediately, they encountered their first challenge, a building that appeared to contain both enemy fighters and civilian hostages. Command, this is Alpha Team, Sarah reported into her radio. We have eyes on multiple individuals in Building 7, but we can't determine combatant status from our current position. Request guidance on rules of engagement. The response came back quickly. Alpha Team, you are authorized to engage confirmed combatants only. Civilian casualties will result in mission failure. Proceed with caution. Torres gathered the team for a quick tactical discussion. We need to get closer for positive identification before we can take any action, she said. Martinez, can you coordinate with the other teams to make sure we don't have any friendly fire issues if this turns into a firefight? Sarah was already working her radio, establishing contact with the other teams, and setting up communication protocols that would prevent confusion if multiple units ended up engaging targets in the same area. The coordination was complex, requiring her to track the positions and movements of 6 different teams while maintaining awareness of her own team's tactical situation. As they moved closer to the target building, Sarah spotted movement in an upper window that appeared to be an enemy sniper positioning himself to fire on other teams in the area. Torres, possible sniper in the 3rd floor east window of Building 7, she reported quietly. Torres raised her binoculars and confirmed the sighting. Good eye. Johnson, can you take that position with the rifle? Johnson studied the target through his scope. Negative. Too many civilians in the background. Can't take the shot without risk of collateral damage. Sarah was already thinking through alternative approaches. What if we coordinate with Bravo Team to create a distraction on the west side of the building? The sniper might reposition to engage them, giving us a clearer shot or allowing us to move to a better position. Torres considered the suggestion, then nodded. Do it. Set up the coordination with Bravo Team. The tactical coordination required precise timing and clear communication. Sarah had to explain the situation to Bravo Team's leader, coordinate the timing of their diversionary movement, and ensure that all teams in the area knew about the planned operation to avoid confusion or friendly fire incidents. Bravo Team, execute diversion in 30 seconds, Sarah transmitted. Alpha Team will engage sniper target when he repositions. All other teams maintain current positions until all clear signal. The plan worked perfectly. The sniper moved to engage what he thought was a vulnerable target, exposing himself to Johnson's position. The shot was clean and precise, eliminating the threat without endangering any civilians in the area. Excellent coordination, Torres said as they prepared to clear the building. That was textbook tactical communication under pressure. The building clearance proved to be even more challenging than the sniper engagement. Each room potentially contained a mixture of enemy combatants and civilian hostages, requiring the team to make rapid decisions about when to use force and when to show restraint. Sarah found herself not just handling communications, but also helping to assess threats and coordinate the complex process of separating combatants from civilians. In one room, they encountered a scenario that tested everyone's judgment. Two individuals were present, one clearly armed and hostile, the other appearing to be a civilian but positioned in a way that suggested possible cooperation with the enemy. The situation required split-second decision-making with potentially lethal consequences for making the wrong choice. Wilson, take the armed combatant, Torres ordered. Martinez, can you handle crowd control with the civilian? Stevens, watch the doorway for additional threats. Sarah moved quickly to control the potentially hostile civilian, using verbal commands and positioning to neutralize any threat he might pose without resorting to force. Her approach was calm but firm, demonstrating the kind of controlled aggression that was essential in urban warfare scenarios. The civilian turned out to be exactly what he appeared to be, a frightened non-combatant who had been forced into the situation by the enemy fighters. Sarah's restraint and good judgment had prevented an unnecessary casualty while maintaining the security of the team. Good call on the civilian assessment, Torres said after they had secured the room. That could have gone very wrong with a different approach. As the exercise continued, Sarah found herself taking on more responsibility within the team. Torres was clearly evaluating her performance and abilities, gradually giving her more complex tasks and greater independence in executing them. Sarah was handling not just communications, but also tactical planning, threat assessment, and team coordination. During a brief pause between buildings, Torres pulled Sarah aside for a quick conversation. I've been watching your work today, and I'm impressed with your tactical awareness and decision-making under pressure. Have you ever considered applying for officer training? The question surprised Sarah. She had always focused on becoming the best enlisted soldier she could be, and the idea of pursuing a commission had never seriously crossed her mind. I hadn't really thought about it, she replied honestly. You should think about it, Torres said. The Marine Corps needs officers who can perform under pressure and make good decisions in complex situations. Gender isn't the issue, competence is. And you've definitely demonstrated competence today. The conversation was interrupted by radio chatter indicating that another team had encountered heavy resistance and needed support. Sarah immediately began coordinating the response, directing her team and two others to converge on the threatened position while ensuring that the overall mission objectives weren't abandoned in the process. The rescue operation required complex coordination between multiple teams moving through urban terrain while under simulated enemy fire. Sarah found herself essentially functioning as a battlefield coordinator, tracking the positions and status of all friendly forces while directing them to optimal positions for mutual support. Bravo team, move to building entrance Alpha. Charlie team, establish overwatch from the rooftop. Delta team, prepare to assault through the rear entrance on my signal, she transmitted, her voice calm and professional despite the complexity of the situation. The coordinated assault was successful, with the threatened team extracted safely and all enemy positions in the building neutralized. The operation required precise timing and flawless communication, skills that Sarah had been developing throughout her training but had never applied at this level of complexity. During the after-action review, Colonel Hayes specifically mentioned the quality of the tactical coordination that had made the rescue operation possible. Someone kept their head under pressure and made sure all the moving pieces worked together effectively, she said, her gaze settling on Sarah. That's the kind of leadership we need in complex combat situations. After the review session, Johnson approached Sarah for the first time since their early confrontations. His manner was awkward but seemed genuinely respectful. I wanted to say that you did good work today, he said. That coordination stuff during the rescue operation was solid. I couldn't have pulled that together like you did. The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than she had expected. Johnson had been one of her harshest critics, and his recognition of her performance represented a significant shift in how she was viewed by the group. Thanks, she replied. Everyone contributed to making it work. That's what good teams do. Yeah, but someone has to pull it all together, Johnson said. Today that was you. As the day concluded and the teams prepared to return to base, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. She was no longer fighting just to prove she belonged. She was demonstrating leadership and tactical skills that were being recognized by both peers and superiors. Colonel Hayes appeared beside her as she finished cleaning her equipment. "Martinez, I understand you've been having an interesting journey through this program," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, unsure where the conversation was heading. "Good. Easy journeys don't teach you much about yourself or your capabilities. The Marines need people who can handle adversity and still perform when it matters. From what I've observed today, you're developing into exactly that kind of Marine." The colonel's words were simple, but they carried weight coming from someone of her experience and reputation. Sarah felt a surge of pride and confidence that was different from the satisfaction of individual accomplishments. This was recognition of her potential as a leader and professional soldier. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah said. "I'm trying to live up to the standards." "You're not just living up to standards," Hayes replied. "You're helping to set them. Keep that in mind as you move forward." That evening, as Sarah reviewed the day's events, she realized that something fundamental had shifted in her situation. She was no longer the outsider trying to prove she belonged. She was becoming a leader whose skills and judgment were valued by her peers and superiors. The journey wasn't over, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time since arriving at Camp Pendleton, Sarah felt truly confident that she had found her place in the Marine Corps. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that her place might be bigger than she had originally imagined. Davis joined her as she sat reviewing tactical manuals, bringing 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. "Heard Torres talk to you about officer training," he said, settling down beside her. "Word travels fast around here," Sarah replied with a smile. "It should," Davis said. "What you did today was impressive. Most of us are still learning how to handle our individual responsibilities. You were coordinating multiple teams and making tactical decisions that affected the entire operation." Sarah considered the observation. "I just did what needed to be done. The situation required someone to take charge of the coordination, so I did it." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Davis said. "You saw what needed to be done, and you did it, even though nobody specifically assigned you that responsibility. That's leadership." As Sarah went to sleep that night, she thought about Torres's question about officer training. For the first time, she allowed herself to seriously consider the possibility that her future in the Marine Corps might involve more than just proving she could do the same job as her male colleagues. Maybe she could help lead the way for other women who would follow behind her. The arrival of Week 8 brought an unexpected development that would test everything Sarah had learned and prove to be the defining moment of her training experience. A message came down through official channels that a senior general would be visiting Camp Pendleton to observe the advanced training program and evaluate its effectiveness in preparing Marines for modern combat scenarios. The announcement created a buzz of nervous energy throughout the training company. General Patricia Morrison was a 3-star general with a reputation for demanding excellence and having little patience for substandard performance. Her visit would include observing live-fire exercises, reviewing training records, and conducting interviews with selected recruits to assess their readiness for deployment. "This is it," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez announced to the assembled recruits. "This is your chance to show that everything we've put you through has been worthwhile." The general will be selecting recruits for a special assignment, an accelerated deployment to an overseas training mission that will put you directly into advisory roles with Allied forces. Sarah felt her heart rate increase at the news. An accelerated deployment would be an incredible opportunity to apply her training in real-world situations, but it would also mean facing scrutiny from the highest levels of Marine Corps leadership. She had proven herself to her immediate peers and instructors, but a general's evaluation would be different entirely. The preparation for General Morrison's visit intensified the training schedule significantly. The recruits spent long hours rehearsing complex tactical scenarios, reviewing procedures, and ensuring their equipment was in perfect condition. Sarah found herself working closely with Torres, who had been selected to brief the general on the innovative coordination techniques they had developed during their training exercises. "I want you to assist with the briefing," Torres told Sarah as they prepared their presentation materials. "The coordination methods we used during the urban warfare exercises were largely your innovations, and you can explain them better than I can." Sarah felt honored to be included in such a high-level briefing, but she was also nervous about the exposure. Speaking directly to a three-star general would be unlike any interaction she had experienced in her military career. The stakes felt enormous, and she knew that her performance could significantly impact her future opportunities. The day before the general's arrival, Colonel Hayes gathered Sarah and Torres for a private meeting. "Tomorrow is going to be important for both of you," she said. "General Morrison is specifically interested in evaluating new approaches to combat coordination and leadership development. Your work together has been exemplary, and I want her to see what's possible when we focus on competence rather than outdated assumptions." Hayes paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Martinez, I want you to understand that you'll be representing more than just yourself tomorrow. There are people throughout the Marine Corps who are watching to see whether integrating women into combat roles is working effectively. Your performance will influence decisions that affect thousands of other women who want to serve in these positions." The weight of that responsibility was both inspiring and terrifying. Sarah had always known that her success or failure would have implications beyond her own career, but having it stated so directly by a senior officer made the stakes feel very real. "I understand, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I'll do my best to represent the Corps well." "I know you will," Hayes said. "Just remember, you're here because you earned it. Focus on demonstrating the skills and judgment that brought you this far." That evening, Sarah spent hours reviewing her notes and practicing the technical explanations she would need to provide during the briefing. The coordination techniques she had developed were complex, involving real-time management of multiple communication channels while maintaining tactical awareness of rapidly changing battlefield situations. Davis found her in the study room late that night, surrounded by tactical manuals and communication protocols. "You're going to do fine tomorrow," he said, settling down across from her. "I've watched you handle pressure situations for weeks now. A briefing is just another type of mission." "This feels different," Sarah admitted. "If I mess up a training exercise, it affects my squad. If I mess up tomorrow, it could affect policy decisions that impact thousands of people." "That's exactly why they picked you for this," Davis said. "They know you won't mess up. You've never let the pressure get to you before, and you're not going to start now." Sarah appreciated the confidence, but she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would be unlike anything she had faced so far in her training. General Morrison arrived at Camp Pendleton early the next morning, accompanied by a small staff of senior officers and aides. Sarah got her first glimpse of the general during the formal welcoming ceremony, and was immediately struck by her commanding presence. Morrison was a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. During the initial facility tour, Sarah and Torres waited in a briefing room, reviewing their presentation materials one final time. They had prepared a detailed explanation of the coordination techniques they had developed, including specific examples from their training exercises and analysis of how these methods could be applied in real combat situations. "Remember," Torres said as they heard footsteps approaching in the hallway, "we're not just explaining what we did, we're showing them a new way of thinking about battlefield coordination." The door opened, and General Morrison entered, followed by Colonel Hayes and several other senior officers. The general was even more imposing in person, with an aura of authority that filled the room. Sarah felt her nervousness spike, but she forced herself to maintain military bearing and professional composure. "General Morrison," Colonel Hayes said, "I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Torres and Lance Corporal Martinez. They've been developing innovative approaches to tactical coordination that I believe will interest you." The general's gaze settled on Sarah, and she felt as though she was being evaluated down to the cellular level. "Lance Corporal Martinez," Morrison said, her voice crisp and clear. "I understand you've been making quite an impression during your training here." "I've been doing my best to meet the standards, ma'am," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Meeting standards is the minimum expectation," Morrison said. "I'm more interested in hearing about how you've been exceeding them." Torres stepped forward to begin the briefing, but the general held up a hand. "Before we start with formal presentations, I'd like to hear directly from Lance Corporal Martinez about her experience in this program. I'm particularly interested in challenges you've faced and how you've overcome them." Sarah felt the attention of everyone in the room focusing on her. This wasn't part of the planned briefing, and she had no prepared remarks for such a direct question. She took a breath and decided to answer honestly rather than trying to provide what she thought the general wanted to hear. "Ma'am, the biggest challenge has been proving that I belong here based on my performance rather than my gender," Sarah said. "Some of my fellow recruits initially assumed I was here because of politics rather than qualifications. I've had to consistently demonstrate my competence in ways that male recruits don't typically face. The general nodded, her expression unreadable. How has that challenge affected your performance and development? Sarah considered the question carefully. Initially, it was distracting and frustrating. But, ultimately, it forced me to develop a deeper understanding of tactics and coordination than I might have achieved otherwise. When you know you're being held to a higher standard, you have to exceed that standard to succeed. Interesting perspective, Morrison said. Give me a specific example of how that higher standard led to innovation in your tactical approach. Sarah felt more confident now, moving into territory where she could discuss concrete examples rather than abstract concepts. During our urban warfare exercises, I noticed that the standard communication protocols weren't sufficient for coordinating multiple teams in complex scenarios. I developed a modified approach that allows real-time tracking of all friendly forces while maintaining secure communications with headquarters. The general leaned forward slightly, showing genuine interest. Explain that modified approach. Sarah moved to the briefing materials and began explaining the technical details of her coordination system. As she talked through the methods and demonstrated how they had been applied during actual exercises, she felt her nervousness disappearing. This was material she understood completely, innovations she had developed through careful analysis and practical application. The key insight, Sarah explained, was that traditional communication methods assume a relatively static battlefield where units move slowly and maintain consistent positions. Modern urban warfare requires rapid adaptation to changing situations, which means coordination methods must be more flexible and responsive. General Morrison asked detailed technical questions that demonstrated her own deep understanding of tactical communications. Sarah found herself engaged in the kind of professional military discussion she had always hoped to participate in, where ideas were evaluated on their merit rather than on who was presenting them. Show me how this would work in a real scenario, Morrison said. Torres, set up a simulated coordination problem. Martinez, walk me through how you would handle it using your modified protocols. The impromptu exercise was complex, involving multiple teams with conflicting objectives and limited communication capability. Sarah found herself thinking through the problem in real time, adapting her coordination methods to address specific challenges as they arose. As she worked through the scenario, explaining her decision-making process to the general, Sarah realized that something important was happening. This wasn't just a demonstration of her technical skills. It was a conversation between military professionals discussing tactical innovations. The general was treating her as a peer whose ideas had value, rather than as a curiosity to be evaluated. Excellent work, Morrison said when Sarah finished the demonstration. That's exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we need in modern combat operations. Colonel Hayes, I want a full report on these coordination methods and recommendations for incorporating them into standard training protocols. The formal briefing that followed went smoothly, with Torres and Sarah working together to present their innovations to the assembled officers. Sarah felt confident and professional, building on the positive momentum from her individual discussion with the general. After the briefing concluded, General Morrison asked to speak with Sarah privately. They walked outside to a quiet area overlooking the training grounds, where other recruits were conducting exercises in the distance. Lance Corporal Martinez, the general said, I want to be direct with you about something. Your performance here has been exceptional, but, more importantly, your approach to leadership and problem-solving represents exactly what the Marine Corps needs as we adapt to new challenges. Sarah felt a surge of pride at the recognition, but she sensed that the general had more to say. I'm offering you immediate selection for the Accelerated Deployment Program, with a recommendation for advanced leadership training upon your return, Morrison continued. This would put you on a fast track for promotion and increased responsibility within the Corps. The offer was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. It represented not just recognition of her individual achievements, but validation of her potential as a future leader in the Marine Corps. There's something else, the general added. I want you to know that your success here has influenced my recommendations regarding women in combat roles. Your performance demonstrates that integration can work effectively when we focus on competence rather than assumptions. The weight of that statement hit Sarah immediately. Her individual journey through the training program had become part of a larger conversation about military policy and opportunities for future generations of women in the Marine Corps. Thank you, ma'am, Sarah said. I'm honored by the offer and the confidence you're showing in my abilities. The confidence is earned, Morrison replied. You've proven yourself under pressure and demonstrated the kind of adaptive leadership we need. Don't let anyone tell you that you're here because of anything other than your own competence and dedication." As they walked back toward the headquarters building, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first day when she stepped off the transport bus. The journey from proving she belonged to being recognized as a leader had been challenging, but it had also revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. That evening, word of Sarah's selection for the accelerated deployment spread quickly through the training company. The reactions were overwhelmingly positive, with even former critics like Johnson offering genuine congratulations on her achievement. "You earned this," Johnson said as the recruits gathered for evening chow. "I wasn't sure about having women in combat roles when this all started, but watching you work changed my mind. If more people could perform like you have, gender wouldn't even be a discussion." The acknowledgement from Johnson felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with confrontation and skepticism, but ended with mutual respect and professional recognition. Sarah realized that her journey had been about more than just personal success. It had been about changing minds and opening doors for others who would follow. Davis found her later that evening as she prepared her equipment for the deployment. "Heard the general was impressed," he said with a grin. "Can't say I'm surprised. I've been watching you develop into a leader since day one." "It doesn't feel real yet," Sarah admitted. 6 months ago, I was just hoping to make it through basic training without anyone questioning whether I belonged. Now I'm being offered leadership positions and policy influence. That's what happens when you focus on excellence instead of just acceptance," Davis said. "You didn't just prove you could do the job. You proved you could do it better than most people expected was possible." As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she thought about General Morrison's words regarding her influence on policy decisions. The responsibility was daunting, but it was also inspiring. She had always wanted to serve her country effectively, but now she had the opportunity to help shape how that service would look for future generations of women in the military. The journey that had begun with harassment and skepticism was evolving into something much larger than her individual career. Sarah was becoming part of the foundation for changes that would affect thousands of women who wanted to serve in combat roles. It was a responsibility she took seriously, and one that would continue to motivate her throughout her military career. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight Sarah felt confident that she was ready to meet them. She had proven herself under the most difficult circumstances and earned the respect of peers and superiors through consistent performance and professional excellence. Most importantly, she had discovered that her own capabilities were greater than she had ever imagined when she first decided to pursue her military dreams. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the deck of a military transport ship approaching the coast of an allied nation, where she would begin her first real deployment. The accelerated training program had compressed what normally took 2 years into an intensive 8-month experience that pushed her capabilities to their limits and beyond. Now, as a newly promoted corporal and squad leader, she was about to put everything she had learned into practice in real-world conditions. The mission was complex and politically sensitive. Sarah's unit was part of an international training initiative designed to help Allied forces develop modern tactical coordination capabilities. Her role would involve not just leading her own squad, but also working directly with foreign military officers to transfer the innovative coordination techniques she had developed during her training at Camp Pendleton. As the transport approached the harbor, Sarah reviewed the mission briefing materials one final time. She would be commanding a squad of 8 Marines, including several who had been her peers during training and others who were coming from different programs. The responsibility was significant, but she felt prepared for the challenge in ways she never could have imagined when she first arrived at basic training. Lance Corporal Davis approached her at the ship's rail, carrying his own equipment bag and wearing the confident expression she had come to associate with soldiers who were ready for action. "Excited about finally getting to test all that training in real conditions?" he asked. "Excited and nervous," Sarah replied honestly. "It's one thing to coordinate exercises where the worst consequence is failing a training scenario. This time, the decisions I make could affect real mission outcomes and the safety of the people under my command." "That's exactly why they picked you for this," Davis said. "You've always understood that the training scenarios represent real situations where people's lives depend on making good decisions. Most soldiers take longer to develop that level of responsibility." The harbor was bustling with military activity as their transport ship docked. Sarah could see representatives from several Allied nations waiting to welcome the American training team, along with local officials and media representatives covering the international cooperation effort. The visibility of the mission added another layer of pressure, knowing that their performance would be scrutinized not just by military superiors but by government officials and the public. Colonel Hayes was waiting on the dock as Sarah's unit disembarked. The colonel had been promoted since their time together at Camp Pendleton and was now serving as the overall commander of the international training mission. Seeing her familiar face among the crowd of unfamiliar officials was reassuring to Sarah as she stepped onto foreign soil for the first time in her military career. "Corporal Martinez," Hayes said as Sarah approached with her squad, ready to put those coordination skills to work in a real operational environment. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "My squad is prepared to begin training operations immediately." "Good," Hayes said, "because we have a situation that's going to require exactly the kind of adaptive thinking you're known for. Our counterparts have been dealing with a series of security incidents that require coordinated response between multiple agencies and military units. Traditional communication methods haven't been effective, and they've specifically requested assistance with tactical coordination." As Sarah learned more about the mission parameters, she realized that the challenges would be even more complex than anything she had faced during training. She would need to work with soldiers who spoke different languages, operated under different protocols, and had varying levels of experience with modern tactical coordination methods. The technical aspects of the coordination would be complicated by cultural differences and political sensitivities. The first week of the deployment involved intensive meetings with counterpart units and assessment of existing capabilities. Sarah found herself working closely with Major Chun, a highly experienced officer from the Allied military who had been designated as her primary counterpart for developing new coordination protocols. "Your reputation precedes you, Corporal Martinez," Major Chun said during their first formal meeting. "We have heard about the innovative methods you developed during your training, and we are eager to learn how they might be adapted to our operational environment." Sarah was flattered by the recognition, but she was also aware that adapting her techniques to work with international partners would require significant modifications. "I appreciate the confidence, sir. I'm looking forward to working together to develop approaches that work effectively for your specific requirements." The first joint exercise revealed both the potential and the challenges of international coordination. Sarah's squad worked smoothly with their American counterparts, using communication protocols and tactical methods they had practiced extensively. However, integrating the Allied forces into the same coordination framework proved more difficult than anticipated. Language barriers created delays in communication that could be critical in real operational situations. Different military cultures had varying approaches to decision-making authority and information sharing that affected how quickly units could respond to changing tactical situations. Equipment differences meant that some of the technical solutions Sarah had developed weren't directly applicable to the capabilities available to Allied forces. "We need to modify our approach," Sarah told Davis after reviewing the exercise results. "The coordination methods that work well for American units need to be adapted to account for the different capabilities and procedures of our partners." "That's going to require some creative problem solving," Davis replied. "How do you maintain the speed and flexibility that makes your coordination methods effective while accounting for all these additional variables?" Sarah spent the next several days working with Major Chun and other Allied officers to understand their operational constraints and develop modified protocols that could work effectively in a multinational environment. The process required her to think beyond the techniques she had learned during training and develop new approaches that addressed previously unconsidered challenges. The breakthrough came during a brainstorming session where Sarah realized that the key was creating flexible communication protocols that could adapt to different languages and equipment capabilities while maintaining the essential elements that made rapid coordination possible. Instead of trying to force all units to use identical methods, she developed a system that allowed different units to maintain their preferred approaches while ensuring that critical information could be shared quickly and accurately between them. "This is brilliant," Major Chin said as Sarah explained her modified coordination framework. "You have found a way to preserve the advantages of your original approach while making it accessible to units with very different capabilities and procedures." The first test of the modified system came during a complex exercise that simulated the kind of multi-agency response that had been causing problems for local authorities. The scenario involved coordinating between military units, police forces, emergency responders, and civilian authorities to respond to a simulated terrorist incident in an urban environment. Sarah found herself at the center of the coordination effort, managing communication between more than a dozen different agencies while tracking the tactical situation and adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. The modified protocols worked exactly as designed, allowing each agency to maintain their preferred communication methods while ensuring that critical information reached all relevant parties quickly and accurately. Outstanding work, Corporal, Colonel Hayes said after reviewing the exercise results. The coordination was flawless, and the response time was significantly faster than what we've been able to achieve with traditional methods. You've solved a problem that has been frustrating our partners for months. The success of the exercise led to requests from additional allied units to learn the modified coordination techniques. Sarah found herself conducting training sessions for officers and enlisted personnel from multiple nations, explaining not just the technical aspects of the coordination methods, but also the tactical thinking that made them effective. During one of these training sessions, Sarah was working with a group of female officers from the Allied military when one of them asked a question that caught her off guard. Corporal Martinez, we have heard about the challenges you faced as a woman during your training in the United States. How do you maintain confidence in your abilities when some people question whether you belong in combat roles? The question was personal in a way that Sarah hadn't expected in a professional training environment, but she could see that the women in the group were genuinely interested in her response. She realized that her experiences had relevance beyond just her own military career. Other women in similar situations were looking to her example for guidance. The key is focusing on performance rather than acceptance, Sarah said. I learned early that trying to convince people to accept me was less effective than simply demonstrating my competence consistently. Eventually, results speak louder than prejudice, but you have to be prepared to prove yourself repeatedly. But how do you handle the extra pressure of knowing that your failures reflect on all women rather than just yourself? Another officer asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. That pressure is real, and it can be overwhelming if you let it become the focus of your attention. I've learned to think of it as motivation rather than burden. Every success opens doors for other women who will follow, which makes the effort worthwhile even when it's difficult. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, ranging beyond tactical coordination to discuss broader issues of military leadership and professional development. Sarah realized that she had become not just a technical expert, but also a role model for women in the military who were facing similar challenges in their own careers. After the training session, Major Chin approached Sarah with an unexpected request. Corporal Martinez, I would like to recommend you for a special recognition that our government gives to foreign military personnel who make exceptional contributions to our national security capabilities. Your work here has significantly improved our ability to respond to complex security situations. The honor was unexpected and deeply meaningful to Sarah. Recognition from foreign allies represented validation that her contributions had value beyond just her own military career or even American military capabilities. Her work was having a positive impact on international security cooperation. As the deployment entered its final weeks, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since those early days of training when she was focused simply on proving she belonged. She had evolved from someone fighting for acceptance to someone whose expertise was being sought by military professionals from multiple nations. The journey had been challenging, but it had also revealed capabilities and opportunities she never could have imagined. The final exercise of the deployment was designed to test all the coordination improvements that had been developed during the mission. Sarah found herself coordinating a complex operation involving American forces, allied military units, local police, emergency responders, and civilian authorities responding to a simulated major security incident. The exercise was conducted under observation by senior officials from multiple governments, including some who had initially been skeptical about the value of the international training program. Sarah knew that the results would influence decisions about future cooperation and the continuation of similar missions. As the exercise began, Sarah quickly established communication with all participating units and began coordinating their response to the simulated incident. The modified protocols worked flawlessly, allowing rapid information sharing and coordinated tactical responses that addressed the threat more quickly and effectively than traditional methods had previously achieved. Exceptional coordination, reported the exercise controller as the scenario concluded. Response time was 40% faster than previous exercises, and the level of integration between different agencies was unprecedented. This represents a significant improvement in our collective security capabilities. During the final debrief, General Morrison, who had traveled to observe the culminating exercise, addressed the assembled participants. "What we have seen here represents the future of international military cooperation," she said. "The coordination methods developed by Corporal Martinez and her team have proven that we can work together more effectively than ever before." The general's gaze settled on Sarah. "Corporal Martinez, your innovations have not only improved tactical coordination, but have also demonstrated the value of diversity in military leadership. Your unique perspective and problem-solving approach have contributed to capabilities that would not have been developed otherwise." After the ceremony, General Morrison spoke privately with Sarah about her future career opportunities. "I'm recommending you for immediate enrollment in advanced leadership development programs.